Part 3 Harvest, March 17th, 1994. Jesus, what happened to you? Cindy Caswell said, as her roommate came into the apartment, sobbing almost hysterically. One of the buttons on the girl's tuxedo shirt was torn off. It was awful, she got out, then burst into renewed spasms as she fell into her lover's arms. 3 of them. They tried. Hey now, Cindy said gently, instinctively using a phrase her mother had used to comfort her when she was little. Hey. She rubbed April's back and held her as sobs racked the girl's body. Fucking St. Patrick's Day, Cindy thought disgustedly. Green beer and stupid music, and every drunkenish asshole thinks the rules don't apply today. Let me get a shower going, and we'll get you all clean and fresh and wrapped in a warm blanket. Then you can tell me about it if you want. April Lassiter nodded as Cindy led her towards the bathroom. Hope Henry's home, Cindy found herself thinking. We may want to talk to him. Can't do it, Henry Bowman said for the 3rd or 4th time. It's a felony. If you were a juvenile, I'd say go for it, but you're not. A felony conviction will fuck up your whole life, and that's no exaggeration. So would. I know what you're going to say, Henry interrupted, and I agree with you. But carrying a gun or a knife or a sap for protection is like wearing a seatbelt. You have to do it every single day. If you do it every single day where it's illegal, you are going to get caught, period. Then, if you're lucky, the cop who arrested you will let you off if you blow him and his partner. How does that sound? Not much better than 3 drunks slowed down by $50 worth of green beer, does it? April closed her eyes and shuddered. Look, Henry said, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm trying to make you see the whole picture. Bar parking lots are dangerous places, particularly the ones in so-called nice neighborhoods. A place like Cindy works behind a chemical plant and under so many high-voltage lines it hurts to touch your car when the ground's wet, where the girls have to pretend every shit bum that walks in gives her a wide on. Management knows there's a risk there. That's why there's a guy weighs 280 with a bunch of scar tissue on his knuckles standing in the parking lot, another one at the door, and a cop who's screwing one of the dancers cruising by in a squad car every 5 minutes. Place is probably the safest bar in a 3-state area. But where you work, with the cappuccino machine and the 40 different kinds of beer, and all the college kids in the shirts and pants that look sloppy but cost $100 each, that's a different story. Guy could punch out every waitress in the place, take all his clothes off, jump up on the bar and smoke a cigar with his butt. Nobody would do a thing. 90-pound busboy would stand there with his mouth open, black dishwasher with a do-rag would be saying, "Be cool, bro," and the owner would be staring at the cash register to make sure the bartender with the coke habit wasn't dipping into the till. And that's inside the building. You expect security in the parking lot? Maybe after we pay off the national debt, but not before. April was seething. So you're saying just lie back and enjoy it? Not at all, Henry said gently. I can set you up with a couple things that the cops can't nail you for. Pepper spray, stuff like that. Nothing like a decent gun, but better than nothing. The girl nodded. When the hell is this stupid state going to change the law? April asked. I don't know. 3rd time's the charm. The way those bastards in the Capitol treat us, it makes me want to sandpaper a few more maple dowels, Cindy said softly. Henry's heart lurched in his chest, and April gave her lover a questioning look. Vampires, Cindy explained to the younger girl. You know, bloodsuckers, wooden stake through the heart. Oh, sure, the younger girl said, now understanding. Henry Bowman stood up. I have to get going. I'll get back with Cindy as soon as I can, probably by tomorrow afternoon. Then we can talk some more, okay? Yeah, that would be great. And I really want to thank you for coming over right away. I'll see you out, Cindy offered, and walked with Henry to the door. At the doorway, she turned to face him. Smoke a cigar with his butt, she said in a low voice. Her whole face threatened to break into a smile. Hey, it just popped into my head, Henry said defensively. Thanks for coming over, she said as she squeezed his arm. I owe you one. Henry nodded and turned toward the stairs. He was still thinking about politicians and wooden dowels. Vampires did not figure in these thoughts. May 12th, 1994. We're not going to make it, folks, the state rep's aide said. Flanagan's running out the clock. Cindy Caswell winced when she heard the words, but she knew they were true. She glanced at her wristwatch. It was 4:15. That bastard, Cindy said in disgust, and others in the group nodded agreement. They were gathered outside, the door to the Senate chamber. God, but I hate it here, she thought. It was the 17th full day Cindy had spent in the state capitol building, and she had grown to loathe the place. "Too late to get a law, but not too late to get a vote," one of the others in the group said. He looked up at the rep's assistant. "We've got to have a Senate vote, people. Win, lose, or draw, these spineless bastards have got to be forced to go on record, one side or the other." "We'll have that, no question," the aide assured him. "Some of these senators are afraid they're going to be boiled in oil by their constituents if they don't prove they're in favor of the rights of the citizen." "Too bad fear is the only thing that seems to work on these jerks," Cindy said. "Fear may be the only thing that bothers these guys, but when they feel it, it works great. We do have these guys scared. Flanagan's so terrified of this thing landing on his desk that he's called in every chit he has out to get it voted down in the Senate. Senators are more scared of the voters than they are of him, though. What does that tell you, huh?" Cindy smiled a little, and the aide, seeing the change, pressed on. "Come on, let's go put the fear of God into a couple more of them before they let out for the year." Cindy Caswell and 7 others followed the aide down the hall of the Capitol building in Jefferson City, Missouri. They were in the Capitol on the last day of the 1994 legislative session because of a bill known as the Missouri Public Safety Law. Under existing Missouri law, it was a felony for a citizen to carry any sort of concealable weapon for protection, either on his person or readily available in a vehicle. The only exemptions were for police officers, judges, and officials authorized to execute process. This law had been passed in 1874 during Reconstruction and had obviously been designed to keep former slaves from being able to protect themselves. Prior to 1967, no white person had ever been arrested for violating this Missouri law. Al Goodman had explained this to Walter Bowman when Walter and his son Henry had come into Goodman's for guns in May of 1963. In the 3 most recent decades, however, all the other Jim Crow laws in Missouri had been stricken from the law books, and blacks had been elected and appointed to many positions of power in the state. Gradually, the prohibition on self-protection outside the home was applied to all Missouri residents, not just minorities. By 1992, Missouri led the nation in arresting people for carrying weapons for protection. Just before the start of the 1992 session, 2 well-to-do citizens who carried police credentials and were therefore exempt from the prohibition had decided that they'd had enough of waiting for the NRA to do something about the problem. They had hired a lobbyist to help get this last bit of Jim Crow legislation off the Missouri books. A number of grassroots human and civil rights organizations had immediately thrown their entire weight behind the effort. Missouri Citizens for Civil Liberties, the Second Amendment Coalition of Missouri, and the Western Missouri Shooters Alliance all went into high gear to get the Missouri prohibition on self-defense repealed. The next groups to throw in their support were business organizations. Under existing law, criminals had a government guarantee that merchants heading to the bank with the day's receipts had nothing except their fists with which to deter robbers. Every Missouri store owner whose customers paid cash wanted that deplorable state of affairs changed immediately. Not surprisingly, many women's groups followed suit. These groups had learned that men who commit rape upon strangers were statistically very likely to have spent time in prison, and for that reason were likely to carry the AIDS virus. Missouri women knew that following the standard advice to give the attacker whatever he wants so he won't hurt you could easily turn into a death sentence when rape was involved. Suddenly, thousands of women realized what Henry Bowman had told John Parker at Knob Creek. Giving violent criminals a government guarantee that potential victims are defenseless was very bad public policy. Parker had become involved in the issue and had spent much of his own money even though he too carried police credentials. Since he still had to work for a living, Parker could not be there for the last day of the session because of the overwhelming support from these varied groups. The Missouri reform proposal had been constantly in the news in the spring of 1992. The lobbyists had been utterly baffled at the idea of wealthy citizens spending tens of thousands of dollars out of their own pockets to change a law from which they had already secured exemption. Despite this, he had initially done a decent job of developing strategy and guiding the bill through Missouri's House of Representatives, where it passed by a monumental 3-to-L margin. At that point, however, the lobbyists had been overwhelmed by the magnitude of the issue and the depth of police officials' animosity towards the effort. The lobbyist had other clients with strong ties to the police chiefs, and he had resigned near the end of the session. Missouri law enforcement officials were unanimous in their opposition to the proposed public safety law, for 3 very embarrassing reasons. The first was that no police chief wanted to advocate any anti-crime measure if it undermined his ability to get a bigger budget, and/or more authority. The second was that the monopoly on non-uniformed security jobs that off-duty police officers had under the existing law would disappear if the bill was passed. The final reason was that police chiefs in Missouri had spent long years creating the myth that the police controlled the citizenry, rather than the reverse. The last thing police chiefs in Missouri wanted was to have citizens realize that the main difference between private citizens and police officers was that police officers were authorized to arrest people for traffic violations and other misdemeanors, while private citizens could only make arrests for felonies. The police officials could not make these reasons public, and instead embarked on a campaign of hysteria, claiming that every minor argument was likely to result in a homicide if the law was passed. The chiefs insisted that although doctors, nurses, pharmacists, brake mechanics, bus drivers, cooks, and the like were already entrusted with serious public safety and health responsibilities, these same people would suddenly become seething cauldrons of homicidal rage if allowed to defend themselves outside their homes. The civil rights groups countered that this had not occurred in the 34 states which issued permits to their citizens, nor had it happened in Vermont, where no permit for defending oneself was required at all. The chiefs stonewalled. Many Missourians were offended by the notion that they were not as trustworthy as the residents of other states, but the fix was in. When the bill went to the Senate, the senators claimed they'd have to see the results in other states before they'd consider the proposal, and the Citizens Self-Defense Act of 1992 never got out of committee. In 1993, the civil rights groups were without a lobbyist, and through ignorance and other missteps, allowed their bill to get delayed by the senator who claimed to be championing their cause. Once again, the session ended before the Missouri Senate was forced to vote on the proposal. It was in that legislative session that Cindy Caswell first became involved in the issue. In 1994, things heated up. One of the groups published some of their research entitled Self-Defense Laws and Violent Crime Rates in the United States. The document cross-referenced the FBI Uniform Crime Report with the concealed weapons laws of every state in the Union. It also showed the population densities and ethnic composition of each state, and compared the crime rates of states that were similar to each other in all ways except their self-defense laws. The report came to an inescapable conclusion. States with non-discriminatory laws allowing citizens to carry concealed weapons for self-defense were much safer than those where the citizens were, by law, defenseless when outside their homes. The Missouri Civil Rights Group also took the trouble to contact the Attorney General in each of the 34 states which issued licenses. The organization asked for documentation as to how many concealed weapon licensees had been convicted of a violent gun crime after being issued their license. No state AG had been able to provide a single example, and the Civil Rights Group tactfully pointed out to the media that this record was far better than that of any major Missouri law enforcement body. For Missourians, there were two especially eye-opening things in the report. The first was that the safest state in the Union, Vermont, allowed every U.S. citizen, not just Vermont residents, to carry a handgun or other self-defense weapon for protection. The fact that Vermont shared a long border with the state of New York made Vermont's low crime level even more interesting. The second thing that startled Missourians who read the report was the comparison of their state with Indiana. An unspoken assumption among many residents and legislators was that states with high densities of blacks and/or Hispanics could not risk letting their citizens carry guns, especially not without lengthy training requirements and convoluted licensing procedures. The Indiana data blew this theory away. With the same proportion of blacks and Hispanics as Missouri but double the population density, and therefore double the blacks and Hispanics per square mile, Indiana had only 2/3 the homicides and assaults and less than half the robberies of the Show Me state. Furthermore, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, and Terre Haute did not have the gang problems of St. Louis and Kansas City. The only significant difference that anyone could find to account for this disparity in crime rates was that Indiana had enacted a non-discriminatory public safety law in 1973. Indiana's concealed carry license cost only $25 for 4 years and required no special training. Just as with the right to vote, the Indiana authorities were required by law to issue the license to any applicant who satisfied the objective criteria. Arbitrary discrimination by the issuing body was illegal. With these facts in hand, the pro-rights groups went back to their senators. In 1992 and 1993, the reformers had been new to the game and had allowed all sorts of discriminatory elements into the bill in the mistaken belief that it would win support from their enemies. In 1994, they were a lot wiser and knew they could win even if every police chief in the state opposed them. The reformers refused to consider $500 fees, police chief discretion, or any other discriminatory measures that the chiefs wanted included in the bill. Their initial proposal, which had strong support, was to adopt Vermont's law, no license at all. Eventually, and reluctantly, they agreed to offer a bill similar to Indiana's law, for there were still pockets of strong racism in the state, and some legislators could not stomach the notion of letting black citizens defend themselves without some form of government regulation. The theme of the 1994 public safety law was, "I trust you," and it was very successful. Missouri police chiefs and anti-self-defense politicians were forced to admit that no, they did not trust the people they served. In the middle of this controversy was a growing awareness among Missourians of the corruption within their law enforcement community. In 1992, the Highway Patrol was found to have set up illegal wiretaps. This revelation utterly baffled most residents of the state, who saw no possible reason how wiretapping related to radar traps. In 1993, the St. Louis prosecuting attorney who had spent most of his tenure fanatically prosecuting video stores that rented X-rated tapes was arrested paying a prostitute in a motel room near the airport. He stayed in office for several months after the arrest, refusing to resign even after it was learned that he had paid for many such liaisons with public money and maintained a private phone line in his city office that he answered with an alias to schedule paid sex appointments. In 1994, the dam broke. The newspapers documented that city cops were systematically extorting money from motorists. The public learned that juvenile history was ignored in the police officer application process, and that many police officers in St. Louis and Kansas City had extensive juvenile rap sheets, including gang affiliations and murder charges. All efforts to force the departments to open the juvenile records of their officers failed, but the public got the message. Then word got around that one of the officials close to the St. Louis police chief was expunging adult criminal records from the system for applicants to the force. The message to the public was clear. Some city cops were still gang members, and the police chief is trying to avoid being indicted. With the police chiefs utterly devoid of credibility, the only remaining stronghold of resistance to the public safety law within the Missouri legislature was the governor himself. Ken Flanagan had been one of several weak Democratic candidates in the 1992 election who had suddenly found himself in the governor's mansion through sheer providence. There had been two very strong Republican candidates for the office, and one of them, the state's attorney general, had outspent his opponent and won the primary. After the primary, but before the election, revelations of insurance fraud had been published in the newspapers, and the attorney general had been indicted. It cost him the election. Flanagan, as governor, had backed many socialist proposals that the public rejected, and he was determined not to suffer the additional embarrassment of vetoing the public safety law and then having his veto overridden by the legislature. Flanagan had called in every favor possible to get the senators to vote against the bill, but those in favor were still in the majority. The governor's final tactic had been to get an unrelated section of the Senate bill changed slightly from the House version, which had once again passed overwhelmingly, so that when the bill was approved by the Senate, it would have to go to conference committee. Then he had convinced the main sponsor of the bill, Senator Gene Brenner, to delay a vote on the bill until the last possible moment. The carrot Flanagan used on Brenner was $250,000 of money the governor controlled, which he promised to direct to Brenner's upcoming fall campaign for state auditor. It was now 4:30 on the last day of the 1994 Missouri legislative session. Cindy Caswell and other supporters of the bill were calling senators out into the hallway for some last-minute checks on how they intended to vote. All discussion has been considered on Senate Bill 592, the Speaker of the Missouri Senate announced. Senator Adams, Senator Arnold, aye. The Speaker continued down the list as Cindy Caswell and the others sat in the gallery and watched. Where are Jackson, Leland, and Wirtz? Cindy whispered, "They're yes votes. In the men's room. They're hiding out. They won't come out till the vote's over." That was their promise to the governor. Spineless scum, Cindy thought as she shook her head in disgust. The Senate restrooms had several loudspeakers in them wired directly to the Senate chamber. The absent senators knew exactly what they were doing. Don't worry, the aide whispered. We've still got the votes without them. These guys are all up for re-election in 6 months. They'll be history then. The man stopped talking and concentrated on the count. That's it, he whispered. It passed. Cindy Caswell looked at her wristwatch. 5:43. The session ended at 6 p.m. 17 minutes left. She sighed. Not enough time for the bill to go to conference committee. Looks like the governor won. One of the others in the group looked at her. He was a big man with a beard. His name was Arthur Betterson. I don't know about that, Betterson said slowly. I think Flanagan may have signed his own death warrant on this one. Cindy Caswell had no idea exactly how prescient this final comment would prove to be. June 25th, 1994. In preparation for our landing in New York, please make sure your tray tables are stowed and locked and your seat backs are returned to their full upright position. To speed your clearance through U.S. Customs, please have your customs declaration cards ready to present to the customs agent and follow the signs to the proper aisle. Ray Johnson looked around the airplane as the stewardess repeated the message in German, French, Spanish, and Japanese. He absent-mindedly wondered how long it would take 300 passengers to clear customs. Ray had not been to the United States for many years, and then he had traveled with only a CARRY on. He glanced at his declaration card to make sure he'd filled out each portion, then tucked it back in his shirt pocket. That real? The customs agent asked with a scowl as he tilted his head toward Raymond. Why does he think I might be wearing a toupee? Ray thought, mystified by the man's question. Let me see it. The customs agent waited, and Ray belatedly realized the man was talking about the hat Ray was wearing. The battered bush hat had kept the sun out of his eyes for almost 20 years. Ray handed the hat to the man, and the agent inspected the worn, dirty leopard skin band at the base of the crown. Can't let you in with this, he said with a note of finality. He set the hat on a table behind him. Wait a minute, Ray exclaimed. What's the problem? Leopards are protected, sir, the agent said with forced politeness. Whoever sold you this obviously didn't tell you that you can't bring it into the United States. No one sold it to me, Ray said immediately, letting his irritation show. I shot that leopard 15 years ago. Leopard are not prohibited from being hunted. There's so damn many of them in some areas they've cut the trophy fees to encourage people to shoot them, he thought, but did not say. I am a professional hunting guide, Ray explained reasonably, in terms he hoped the man would understand. Surely you've had leopard hides come through customs before? The agent nodded. Got your paperwork on it? The customs man asked in a bored tone. For a 15-year-old hat band? Ray asked in exasperation. It was the wrong reaction, and Ray immediately realized his error, but the words were already out of his mouth. I'm sorry, sir, the agent said in a tone that made it clear that sorrow was the one emotion he did not feel. You can talk to my supervisor, but I can tell you right now what his answer will be. U.S. Customs cannot allow this in the country without the proper documentation. Ray took a deep breath, but before he could apologize, the agent added, Let's take a look at the rest of your luggage. He motioned to the gun cases in the large duffel. Ray Johnson unzipped his duffel bag, and the agent began inspecting his clothes. While the man was doing this, Ray selected a key on his key ring and unlocked the padlocks on his 3 welded aluminum gun cases. The cases had been made on an Indian reservation in Montana. Henry Bowman had a set of them sent over after Ray had admired the ones Henry had brought with him on safari in 1978. They bore the luggage tags of several African airlines, and all showed evidence of much use. Ray opened the first one, which contained his Holland & Holland 600 Nitro double rifle. The agent was feeling around the foam that lined the case as Ray opened the other 2 rectangular aluminum boxes. Finding nothing else in the case, the customs man lifted the big English rifle out of the foam padding and began to examine it carefully. He paused in his inspection when his gaze fell on the muzzle end. A small smile crossed his lips, and he laid the gun down on a table behind him, next to Ray's hat. What else we got here? He said as he moved to the other 2 cases. Winchester Model 70.458 and another one in 338, Ray said as he opened the first case. The pair of 35-year-old rifles lay facing in opposite directions. The 338 was scoped with an out-of-production 3-power loop-hold, while the 458 wore only open sights. Both guns were well cared for but showed the long-term effects of constant use. Again the agent felt around in the foam. After finding nothing, he gave the rifles a brief inspection, left them where they were, and moved on to the third and final aluminum hard case. Semi-auto fall and 2 Smith & Wessons, Ray announced as he opened the metal container. The inspector stared at the guns. Did you buy these guns overseas? He asked. Ray shook his head. No, I've had them since I left the United States in '63. Got your registration papers on them? The man asked. Ray looked blank. Registration? If they were already imported into the U.S. when you left in 1963, one can let them back in, but you have to show proof that they were already in this country. The agent picked up the fall and the .38 Smith & Wesson and laid them next to the .600 double rifle and the hat on the table behind him. You mean you want me to pay import duty on my own guns? Ray asked. He was starting to get irritated again. The agent smiled humorously. No, sir, these 3 guns, he said, indicating the .600 Nitro Holland, the Fowl, and the SNW .38 Chief Special. They're prohibited from importation. They're contraband. I can't let them in the country at all, unless you can prove you already had them here in the United States before you left. Ray Johnson was dumbstruck. Contraband? Prohibited from importation? He said when he finally found his voice. How's that possible? The Gun Control Act of 1968 prohibits importation of handguns that do not meet certain size criteria. This .38 Smith & Wesson cannot be imported unless it has a 3-inch barrel on it. But it obviously was made in the United States, in Springfield, Massachusetts, to be exact, Ray pointed out. That may be, but it is in your luggage and you are getting off a flight from a foreign country. I have to assume that this was a gun that Smith & Wesson sold for export, and you are now trying to import it in violation of the Gun Control Act of 1968. The agent switched his attention to the Belgian rifle on the table. This assault rifle has been prohibited from importation since 1989, the customs agent said with a note of satisfaction. No, it isn't, Ray said immediately. It's not a machine gun, it's the civilian version. It fires semi-auto only, just like a kid's .22. I can demonstrate, he added, starting to walk around the table. The customs agent held up his hand and stopped him. President Bush signed an executive order in 1989 banning all imports of rifles that look like military machine guns. We get a lot of people trying to sneak them in their luggage, he added. I'm not trying to sneak anything in. Ray exploded. I bought that gun in late 1962, and the serial number will prove that FN made it over 30 years ago. If you can prove you had the gun here in the United States prior to 1989, I'll be glad to release this weapon. Otherwise, he let the sentence drop unfinished. Ray took several deep breaths and forced himself to remain calm before speaking. And my Holland & Holland double rifle? He asked finally. Did the president ban that as well? There is a ban on the importation of elephant ivory, sir, and I see that the gun has an ivory front sight. So you want to take the front sight off my 80-year-old English gun because the bead is a piece of ivory half the size of a grain of rice? Ray asked incredulously. One of Ray's last hunting clients, a jeweler from Milwaukee, had offered Ray $40,000 for the rifle when he had seen it. The idea of knocking the front sight off the beautiful Holland & Holland rifle offended Ray greatly. Again, the customs agent shook his head. U.S. Customs has a policy of zero tolerance. That front sight is an integral part of the rifle. The whole gun is contraband. Ray saw that the hint of a smile was starting to appear on the agent's face. Suddenly, a memory from 35 years ago came flooding back. Gene Corson at East Bay Sports in Boston had issued him a warning on the day he had decided to spend his college graduation money on the big rifle, and Ray now recalled his words with almost perfect clarity. You gotta realize, Ray, a lot of people operate on envy. Guy like that jerk would never spend the money to buy a rifle like this, let alone the cost of a safari, no matter how much he had in the bank. Even if someone gave it all to him, he wouldn't have the nerve to go, which is also why he'll never have any real money in the first place. He works for some steady wage and always will. Guy like that gets very uncomfortable at the notion of someone who makes things happen for himself. Suddenly he feels like his own life is pretty shabby. Problem is, people like him, they get half a chance, they too do their level best to screw it up for anyone else. You gotta watch out for them all the time. Envy and resentment are terrible things. Ray Johnson had not practiced law for over 30 years, but his legal instincts finally took over. His face was impassive, and he chose his words carefully before he spoke. I see that there are several things that need to be resolved here. As I say, I have been out of the country for some time and was not aware of the current procedures involved with clearing customs. Will you please put my things aside for a moment and handle some of these other travelers while I use a phone? I think I will be able to produce the kind of documentation or authorization you're looking for. All right, sir, the customs agent said with forced civility. You can use one of the phones behind you. Ray nodded as the agent shoved his bags to the side and turned on his heel to find the bank of payphones. There was one person he knew in the United States that he thought might be able to help him. Ray glanced at the clock on the wall as he stepped up to a vacant phone. Almost midnight. That's 11 o'clock in Missouri. I hope he's home and not over at some girl's house. Raymond poked through his wallet and found the slip of paper he was looking for, then dialed the operator and told her he wanted to make a collect call. He heard Henry Bowman pick up the phone on the second ring. He sounded wide awake. I have a collect call for anyone from a Mr. Raymond Johnson. Will you pay for the call? The operator asked. Yes, I will, Henry said immediately. Go ahead, the operator instructed. Ray, Henry exclaimed, sounding not at all sleepy. Where are you? Here in the States? Henry knew that Ray was moving back to America, but he had not known exactly when. Yeah, I'm at LaGuardia in New York, and I've got a problem. Did I wake you up? No, not at all. Spent all evening doing some geo-shockwave chart analysis, and now I'm down in the shop resizing some bullets before I go to bed. What's the trouble and how can I help? I'm at customs, and they won't let my guns through. Shit, Henry said immediately, but his voice showed no surprise. You don't have any papers showing you left the U.S. with them 30 years ago, so they're trying to stick you with the duty on them, right? Worse than that, my Holland has an ivory front sight which the agent says makes the whole rifle contraband. Jesus! Henry almost shouted. He knew that the 600 Nitro was currently worth more than a new Corvette and rising in value by the month. And he says they have to confiscate it. Then there's some kind of ban on my FN, so I can't bring that one in either. My chief special is too small or something like that, so they have to take it too. And they're taking my hat, he added. That beat-up old thing you always wore? Henry asked. Yeah, that's how this whole mess got started. The man told me he was taking my hat because of the leopard skin band on it, and things went downhill from there. While Ray had been talking, Henry had been scribbling on a pad of paper. Okay, let me get this straight. They're trying to steal your Holland, your Fall, your Smith & Wesson, and your hat. Anything else, particularly guns? No, the only other guns I've got are two old Model 70s, and they didn't say you had to pay duty on them. Claimed they were Winchester exports you were bringing back in or some shit like that. Not yet. How many guys did you piss off? Excuse me? Is there a whole division of customs agents standing over your stuff, rubbing their hands together and telling you you're about to spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth, or have you got one semi-literate GS3 with a high school equivalency degree telling you no because that's his answer to everything? Ray Johnson chuckled despite the situation. In the middle of the night, in response to a completely unexpected phone call, his geologist friend was sounding like a lawyer. It was a good sign. Closer to the latter, I should think, Ray answered. I was only dealing with one fellow. He may have gone to get his boss when I went to make this call, but I think he was busy processing some of the other passengers on my flight. Good, okay. First things first, Henry said, thinking rapidly. Let's look at each thing individually and see what we can do about it. Your Holland is worth 40 to 50 G's, so it's priority number one. Holland keeps records of all the guns they've ever made, but unless the original buyer was an American, which is possible but not terribly likely, that won't do you any good with the feds here. Didn't you tell me you found that rifle in a Boston gun shop back in the late 50s? Yes, Gene Corson's East Bay Sports. I can find out if they're still around, and I can probably locate Gene Corson if he's still alive, and I bet he'd remember that gun even if he doesn't have any records left so he could sign a statement. Henry took a deep breath and continued. But that's our fallback plan, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. Number two, your FAL is a Belgian G model you bought in, 63, 64? 62, before I left the United States. Okay, that's one of the early ones that Browning brought in and sold for about $160, right? Exactly. Those bring $3,000 to $5,000 now, depending on whether they're mint or have been beat to shit. I know a guy at Browning, so there's a chance that I can get you the import record. It's worth how much? Ray demanded in astonishment. Henry laughed. Browning brought in a few Falls guns with semi-auto parts in them and had a bitch of a time selling them. $160 was a lot of dough in '63. That would buy you a Model 70 match rifle, which was a lot more accurate. If semi-autos were your thing, you could have 4 or 5 Garens for the same dough, and 06 AMMO was more powerful and lots cheaper. If full autos turned you on, you could pick up 6 or 8 good ones from Fenwick's or Interarmco for $150 total, and all of them shot cheap surplus ammo, remember? Anyway, that first batch of Falls came in and it took a long time to sell them all. Then years later, when Browning decided to try to sell a few more, our old friends at the ATF decided the guns were too easy to switch back into machine guns. So FN redesigned the receiver so it wouldn't take the full auto parts without major surgery. The guns out of that original batch are legal semi-autos with full auto receivers, with Browning's import markings. They get military collectors all excited. They're more valuable than the registered full auto falls that are in the country. The reason customs won't let you bring it in is because 5 years ago, King George decreed there would be no more imports of guns that look like military rifles, even though they couldn't fire full auto. All imports were stopped overnight, and only those factories that were willing to put stupid-looking thumbhole stocks on their guns so they wouldn't look like military issue could resume shipping. Krauts and the Chinese went along with that nonsense. Other countries decided the U.S. civilian market wasn't worth the trouble and said screw it. So they're going to confiscate your G model, or at the very minimum make you stick on a stupid-looking stock so that it won't look like an fall anymore, unless we can show that it was here prior to '89. Henry sensed that Raymond was about to protest the senselessness of this policy, and quickly went on. Don't ask me to justify this crazy shit, I'm just telling you the score, okay? Right, Ray said, and clamped his mouth shut. He's a hell of a lot more on top of this than I am, Ray told himself. Now your chief special is on the customs shit list because of the Gun Control Act of 1968. That law followed in the tradition of the National Firearms Act of 1934 by using physical dimensions as determining criteria for legality. What do you mean? The '68 Act decreed that any handguns whose aggregate sum of certain specific dimensions fell below a certain total could not be imported. I forget what the minimum total has to be, but a Chief's Special with a 2-inch barrel falls just below it. The same gun with a 3-inch barrel is okay. So what that means is that foreign companies can only import Chief's Special copies if the barrels are 3 inches or longer. So what they do is bring in 3-inch guns, ship in a bunch of 2-inch barrels, switch them in this country, and re-export the 3-inch barrels so they can do the whole thing over again. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Henry chuckled without humor. Then you haven't read many of our country's present gun laws. Anyway, he said, returning to the primary subject, I'm telling you this so you'll understand how you can get that Smith back in the country if all else fails, by swapping barrels. It shouldn't come to that because Smith might have records showing that gun was not exported. Henry took a breath. But personally, I'd let the customs guy steal it if it would get him off my back about the other stuff. Chiefs are decent guns, but they're less than $300, and the quality difference between early '60s J-frames like yours and present-day ones isn't enough to worry about like it is on N-frames. I can have 1 or 100 in your dealer's hands in Aspen long before your 5-day waiting period is up. What 5-day waiting period? That's another story I won't get into right now. Anyway, what I was saying was, unless your 38 was a gift from Grace Kelly in appreciation for letting her blow you, I'd kiss it goodbye without a second thought. Ray Johnson found himself grinning in spite of the situation. Which brings me to the most important point concerning your problem. I'm going to make a phone call to a guy I know, a customs official used to be here in Missouri and now works out of New York, see if he can make all this go away. But I think I can tell you right now what he's going to say, and I'll tell you right now that I agree with it. These government guys have to get something, or they look like idiots, and they hate looking like idiots more than anything in the world. Henry went on before his friend could reply. IRS audits you and throws out 10 G's in legitimate deductions. Doesn't matter, you can document each one 5 ways. Doesn't matter, you got 20,000 more you forgot about and could use to prove they owe you money. Forget it. They will spend $500,000, if that's what it takes, to get you to agree to throw out a few lunches and write them a check for $50 in taxes and $100 in penalties. When they challenge you, you have to concede something. It's not their money, but it is their pride. So don't stand on principle over a hat and A38 special, okay? Let's get your Holland and your Fall and your Winchesters cleared, and let's get you on your way and out of there. You got one guy right now that's about to make your life a nightmare. Let's make it stay at one and fix the problem before we have to deal with the whole fucking Customs Bureau. Let the guy steal the hat and the Smith, if that's what it takes to wave you through. The hat he can turn over to his boss. They'll stick it in a glass case with the banjos made out of turtle shells and the fake Rolexes from Bangkok and show everyone what a great job they're doing, and the agent will get a pat on the back. 38 Smith he can stick in his pocket selling 42nd Street for tax-free cash. His boss is happy, he's happy, and you're happy because you get to get out of that shithole and back to Colorado with your good stuff. Everybody wins. Are you with me on this, Ray? Yes, but... His voice trailed off, not knowing what to say. You thought things only work like this in third world countries? Not America? Henry asked with a laugh, accurately reading his friend's thoughts. Exactly. Things have changed a lot since you lived here. A lot more stuff is illegal, which means there's a lot more money to be made if you're the one who enforces the law. There was a pause in the conversation before Raymond spoke. Do you really think it'll work? He asked, getting back to the most pressing issue. I have to make a call, maybe more than one. At this hour? Mike keeps weird hours, same as me. He's probably busy with some girls who want to earn green cards. Give me your phone number there, but don't hang out by the payphone. Go back to your stuff, and don't let it out of your sight. You don't want anything else suddenly appearing in your bags or stuffed down the bore of your rifle, okay? Got it. Ray read the number off the telephone and thanked Henry for helping him. I'll get on this, and if I can't get hold of Mike, I'll work on some other angles, okay? Okay, and thanks again, Henry. Don't thank me till you're out of there with your stuff, Henry said as he hung up the phone. Hello? The voice said sleepily. Mike, Henry Bowman in Missouri. You awake yet, or you want me to wait while you get your head together? Bowman, geologist from Missouri who's a gun expert and likes fast trucks. I'm awake. What's the story? Got a pencil? Here's my phone number, Henry said, reciting it. Call me back on your cellular. What do you mean? Come on, Mike, I know the drill. You think I'm a moron? Henry repeated the number and hung up. In less than a minute, the phone rang. Okay, what's the deal? Mike Garland asked after Henry answered the phone. I won't waste your time. Good friend of mine's at LaGuardia, returning to the United States after 30 years in Africa as a professional hunting guide. He's a U.S. citizen, name's Ray Johnson. One of your guys at Customs won't let 3 of his guns back in the country because he didn't fill out any registration forms in 1963. Number 1 is an elephant gun, made in England 70 years ago that Ray bought in a Boston sporting goods store in 1959. Customs guy's not asking for duty, he's trying to steal the whole gun because of the front sight. It's a piece of elephant ivory about the size of half a grain of rice. Holland & Holland made the rifle that way, and they have good records, so we can prove that one's already been imported. We just can't do it instantaneously since they're in London. Henry was bluffing. If the original purchaser had not been an American, it would be very difficult to prove that the rifle had already been in the country, as 30-year-old sales records did not exist. Number 2's a Belgian Browning Fall he bought in New York in 1962, now subject to the Bush 1989 ban. Browning only brought in a handful of that model 30 years ago, and Fabrique Nationale's records are impeccable, so we can prove that one too, but again, not this very second since FN's in Belgium. This claim was slightly more accurate than the previous one. Number 3 is A38 Smith & Wesson Chief Special. Gun has a 2-inch barrel, which is in conflict with the import section of the Gun Control Act of 1968. Serial number will prove that it was made before 1968. And Smith & Wesson records will show that it was not part of any export shipment. Take me a few days to get my contacts at the factory in Massachusetts to copy the documentation. Proof on the SNW would be easiest of the 3 to obtain. Last item is the hat my buddy's worn for... His hat? Garland broke in. Right, Ray's a professional hunter and it's got a leopard skin hat band. The man's guided maybe 200 leopard hunts in the last 30 years, and he cut a piece of hide off one of his client's skins. A torn-up section by the exit wound. Been on his hat 10 years or so, but he doesn't have any papers, of course. So here's the deal. I know the way this works, which is why I had you call me back on a cellular, in case the internal affairs guys had your place wired. I'd like you to call the airport, talk to the agent that's holding my buddy up, tell your guy he can confiscate the hat and the .38 revolver if he'll let Ray through with his other guns. Otherwise, we'll get documentation on all the guns, make your agent go through a bunch of busy work, and leave him with just the hat. Okay? Wait a minute, Henry, Garland said over the mobile phone. If he can show that all his guns have already been in the United States, then there's no reason he can't get all of them through Mike, Henry interrupted, speaking slowly. I know the way this works. I'm trying to save everyone some time here. My friend Ray Johnson is a lawyer. He hasn't practiced in 30 years, but he's still licensed in New York, and he still has friends at the silk stocking firm where he used to work. Just think of the .38 as an out-of-court settlement, or a gesture of goodwill, just like my suggestion about the phone. If the guy at the airport wants to be a prick and make Ray miss his plane and have to get a hotel, fine, but he'll eventually get all his guns back. If you tell him to let him go now, your guy can keep Ray's. 38 is consideration for expediting his clearance, okay? But Mike, as we speak, Ray is watching his guns. There is no way that any drugs are going to miraculously appear inside any of them, as can happen sometimes with vehicles, particularly expensive, fast German vehicles, okay? There was a long pause, but Henry remained silent. I'll see what I can do, Garland finally said. Then he hung up. Jesus Christ, what did you do? Ray demanded over the phone. The guy at customs waved me through with everything. Some days you win, Henry replied. What are you going to do now? I left my ticket open since I wasn't sure how long it would take to get through everything. Got to go find a flight to Denver now, but I wanted to call you back first. Go to the TWA desk and see what they've got for St. Louis. That's their hub. Stay here at my place for a day or two before you head for Colorado, Henry offered. You sure that's all right? I live alone, and by the time your plane arrives, I'll have this stuff all done for the driller. Find the next flight, and before it leaves, call here and leave me the flight number. Doesn't matter what time it gets in, just grab the next one out. If I'm sleeping, the recorder will be on and you can leave a message, but I'll be there to pick you up. I'll call the airline to make sure when you're getting in, then meet you at the airport. Well, okay, I'd like that. See you tomorrow then, Henry said, and broke the connection. June 26, 1994. Better put your seatbelt on, Ray, Henry said as he pulled out of the airport parking lot. Cops will write us up if they don't see your shoulder belt across your chest. Which reminds me, how much cash you got on you? Henry Bowman's serious tone was much different from the delighted welcome he had given his friend when he met him at the baggage claim. About 8,000, Ray replied with a baffled look as he fastened his shoulder belt. Why do you ask, and what do you mean the cops will write us up? A lot of states, including this one, it's a crime to drive or ride in a car without wearing a seatbelt. Henry pressed several buttons on a welded steel box bolted to the floor of the GMC and lifted its lid. Give me your dough so I can put it in here. If we get stopped, they'll have to get a search warrant to cut this open. You're welcome to put this in your box, Ray said as he held out the roll of bills. But why is it necessary? Henry did not answer the question, but instead glanced at the face of one of the bills and pulled onto the entrance ramp to the highway. I hope you don't have a lot more like these. These are the old ones, the ones the banks are destroying. Don't deposit many of these or they'll write you up and God knows who'll be at your door next. What are you talking about? Ray asked, utterly confused. Turn on the overhead, Henry said as he put down Ray's money, reached into his right pocket and pulled out his own money clip. With one hand, he slipped the clip off the folded cash and selected a bill that felt nearly new. He glanced at it and saw that it was a 20. Find one of the freshest-looking bills in your roll, Henry told his friend. Hold it up next to this 20, about 5 inches from your nose. Yeah? All right, the light isn't the greatest, but do you see a thin line around the outside of the oval around the portrait of Jackson? It's on my bill, but not yours. As Ray examined the bills, Henry took the remainder of Ray's large roll of cash, dropped it into the metal box, and closed the lid. The box locked automatically. Yeah, I see the line you mean. Okay, my eyes are better than normal, and most people need magnification to see it, but that line is actually the words the United States of America, repeating over and over. I can't make that out with this weak dome light. That's okay, you can see it later, that's the first change. Hold the 2 bills up to the light and you'll see the second change. Look at a spot about 1 inch from the left-hand side of each one. There's a strip running through yours about 1/10 of an inch wide, Ray said immediately. Looks like it's actually inside the paper. It says US a 20, both normally and inverted mirror image. Right. The official explanation for those changes is that they make the bills much more difficult to counterfeit. And that's absolutely true. It would be a cast iron bitch to duplicate those changes exactly. Those 2 changes have received minor mention in the press. Everyone hates counterfeits, and the money doesn't look any different, so nobody cares. It's no more of a change than switching to the current Secretary of the Treasury's signature, like they do with every new series. But there's a third change. The supermarkets in Johannesburg have those scanners that read the funny black lines on packaged products, don't they? The ones where the checker just drags the box of laundry soap over a glass plate or points a plastic gun at it and the description and price pops up on a screen. Yes, we've had those for several years. Those machines mostly work on optical barcode recognition, but it's all the same kind of technology. That strip you found in my 20 is magnetic, and it has a magnetic code embedded in it. That's fact, not rumor, Henry said forcefully. If you run a magnetic code reader over any bill, $5 or larger, series 1990 or later, you will get a unique reading. If you run the magnetic reading over another bill of the same denomination, You will get another unique reading. In 1985, if you wrote a $5,000 check for cash, you'd get 4 or 5 different series, and generally 1 or 2 bills from the 1930s. Do that today, and I guarantee you there won't be a single bill older than 1990 in the pile except 1s and 2s. Take 50 crisp pre-1990 bills in for deposit, and have a friend behind you in the same line hand the same teller a check for cash in exactly the same amount as the money you just deposited. Your buddy won't get a single one of your bills back. The banks have orders to turn in all pre-1990 bills, regardless of condition. So the United States government is now able to track the actual flow of cash, Ray thought aloud. Not only that, but I told you that was a magnetic strip, right? Guess what happens if you have a bunch of bills together? They set off magnetometers at airports, Ray exclaimed. Bingo. But what does that have to do with storing my money in your lockbox inside your car? Nothing at all. I did that because of the seizure laws, Henry explained as he exited the highway onto a 4-lane state road. Cops are seizing property without bringing charges, and their favorite property to seize is cash. The way it works, cops stop a car, or for that matter, a guy walking on the street. They confiscate his wad, say prove you got this legally if you want it back, and let him go with no arrest. That's absurd, Ray exclaimed, thinking immediately about the $50,000 worth of rifles in the back of the vehicle. Where's due process? Where's their probable cause? If they see a bulge in a guy's pocket, that's their probable cause for a search. People who pay for things with cash, like us, are now assumed to be criminals, and the car stop doesn't have to be for a seatbelt. All the cops have to do is say the vehicle fit a profile, and that was why they pulled it over. This car, hell, the latest ghetto craze is small trucks and 4-wheel drives with alloy wheels and low-profile tires. That's enough to stop this thing and search it, especially at 4 in the morning. And since the person isn't charged with anything, just the property, the prosecution doesn't have to prove shit. The owner has to prove he didn't get the money or the car by illegal activity. Cops are seizing cars all the time now. They see one they like, they'll pull it over, find a little something in it, and seize the vehicle. Tell you you're lucky they aren't charging you with something serious. Then if you ever manage to get your car back, you'll discover it's junk because they've used it to haul stuff, left it outside with the windows open, never changed the oil, etc. It can't be serious. Who would stand for that? Everyone. This isn't some secret I'm telling you about. There was a front page article a while back in USA Today, which is our national newspaper sold on every street corner in the country. Big write-up on all the abuses. Gave a bunch of examples. All white guys, by the way. My favorite was a man with a wood splitting and equipment business who likes to fish. He carries cash when he goes on fishing trips in case he finds any deals on used equipment along the way. Cops stopped him in his pickup for 5 over, saw the bulge in his pocket, found 8 G's, so they searched his whole truck. Wasn't so much as an overdue library book, but they kept the cash, and he still doesn't have it back. Henry laughed humorlessly. So they do this big article, but they might as well have been reporting the weather. Nothing changed. Ray Johnson said nothing. What his friend was telling him seemed difficult to believe. Ray looked at Henry and saw him smile humorlessly and nod towards the front of the car. And speak of the devil, Henry said with a sardonic chuckle. Up ahead on the right shoulder of the highway were 7 police cars, all with their lights flashing. A uniformed officer was waving a flashlight, motioning the car ahead of them to pull over. Henry slid in behind the Oldsmobile and braked to a stop. What the hell's this all about? Raymond asked. Safety check is what they call it, Henry replied. They stop everyone, see if they're wearing seatbelts, look for open liquor bottles, sniff the driver's breath, check out the inside of the car, all that. Just keep your hands in plain sight and act like nothing's going on, Henry advised, as he pressed the button to lower the driver's side window, then put both his hands back on top of the steering wheel. Good morning, gentlemen, the Missouri Highway Patrolman said with an air of superiority as he swept the beam of his flashlight around the inside of Henry's GMC. Morning, officer, Henry said, breathing heavily in the man's direction so that he could immediately know that Henry had not been drinking. Been to the airport, I see, the man said. Cheapest fares are at the worst hours, Henry said with a smile. The officer nodded. Drive safely, the patrolman commanded, and waved his flashlight to send Henry and Raymond on their way. Henry checked his mirror, cut the wheel, and accelerated back onto the highway. I don't believe what just happened, Ray said after Henry had rolled up the window. I can't believe anyone here stands for it. They sure as hell wouldn't in South Africa. The hook they use is drunk drivers, Henry explained. There's all sorts of people keep harping on drunk driving and demanding all sorts of shit, lower blood alcohol level limits for drivers, mandatory jail time for convicted DWI offenders, legal liability for bar owners, legal liability for distilleries, you name it. The interesting thing about it is that the death rate from DWI cases is lower than it's ever been. It's been declining every year for several decades. I don't know the exact figures, but when you left the country back in the early 60s, the rate was 3 or 4 times what it is today. Does that make sense? You have a condition that you seem to accept, then after 3/4 of the problem goes away by itself, then you declare a crisis and toss out the Constitution? Henry shook his head, as if to clear it. Now I'm an alcoholic who hasn't had a drink for more than 20 years, but 20 years ago I drove drunk, and I remember what it was like. I don't mean to sound like an advocate for drunk driving, but I don't think drunk drivers as a group have worse vision, reflexes, and motor skills than 80-year-old sober drivers. A fair number of fatal accidents are caused by old people having strokes and heart attacks behind the wheel. Henry heard Ray draw his breath in sharply at this comment. No, I didn't forget about your parents. I'm sorry if I was tactless, but my point is that I expect to have to watch out for that kind of thing. I don't want to live where jackbooted lackeys stop cars with white-haired drivers and make them get out and demonstrate their reflexes, and if they're slow or clumsy, arrest them. Is that why everyone drives so slowly? Raymond asked. What do you mean? Well, it's 4 in the morning, there's only a few cars around, we're on a 4-lane highway, and I don't see anyone going over about 50. Are they all worried about these random stops? Henry laughed. They're driving 55, Ray, because that's the national speed limit. 55 miles an hour on a road like this? Ray Johnson almost yelled. That's right, Mr. Van Winkle, sir. 30 years ago, 75 was fine in a solid axle car with drum brakes, a single master cylinder, lousy steering, no seat belts, and tires with a little more grip than the ones on a shopping cart. Today, most cars have rack and pinion steering, 4-wheel discs with anti-lock, and will stop from 80 in the rain quicker than a 58 Mercury would in the dry. The tires have gotten so good that this truck will go through a slalom course faster than a big block Corvette could in the 70s. We've got dual airbags, more impact protection, and car phones to call in accidents and other road hazards, so we don't need nearly so many highway patrol cars driving around. So the 55 makes perfect sense. But why? Ray asked in utter bewilderment. The law was passed in 73, supposedly to save gas during the energy crisis. Any state refusing to comply didn't get any federal highway funds, which nobody bothered to realize was our own money the feds were so graciously returning to us. So they all shut up and spread their legs, except 1 or 2 states that got creative. I'd have liked to have seen Missouri say fuck off and raise the limit to 80, but our legislature loves federal power even more than most state governments do. Montana, which had no daytime open road speed limits at all, went along with the law, then said that under 100, you were guilty of wasting a natural resource, but not a moving violation, and the fine was $5. Gave the cops a stack of postpaid envelopes so the driver could just stick a 5 in it and be on their way. Nevada had no open road limits day or night prior to the 55, and I hear cops there pretty much ignore speeders. I haven't been there since '68. Anyway, the country endured this nonsense for about 10 years or so, and a giant new consumer electronics industry was built around ever more effective radar detectors. Made Mike Valentine a multimillionaire, and he deserved every penny. Then, after a lot of pressure, the feds decreed that 65 was okay, but only on interstates, and even then only on sections way the hell outside of cities. Never mind that the whole point of the interstate system was uniform, limited access roads to allow safe, fast travel everywhere, and the roads were all engineered for a safe 75 in cars built in the late 50s. Henry quit talking for a few moments, then made a final comment on the subject. Raymond thought he sounded almost apologetic. Normally I drive a little faster than I am right now, because I carry police creds that'll usually get me some professional courtesy. But the guns you got in the back would bring twice what this GMC is worth, and you've already had them almost stolen once today. I don't think we should tempt the cops any more than we have to. They're greedy enough as it is. Ray Johnson nodded. Let's leave your bags in the car until I show you your room, Henry said, sniffing. I think Alan's cooking something. He ushered his friend into the back door of the house. Ray brought his carry-on bag with him as they stepped into Henry's kitchen. Hope you guys want breakfast, Alan Kane said. I made enough for about 5 people. I hadn't expected you up this early, Henry replied. Yeah, it smells great. Ray, this is my friend Alan Kane from Indiana. He's on his way to a gun show in Reno and stopped here yesterday so we could shoot a little. Alan Ray Johnson. Pleased to meet you, Kane said as he put down the spatula and shook Raymond's hand. I've seen Henry's pictures and video footage from Rhodesia. You gave him the best hunt I've ever heard of. Ray smiled at the compliment as he reached into his bag and pulled out his shaving kit. I wanted to get going early, so I thought I'd get breakfast done before you two got back from the airport. Grab a plate. Need to take one of these asthma pills first, Ray said as he unzipped the battered leather kit. You've got asthma? Henry said, glancing over from the counter where he was pouring himself a glass of juice. Real mild case, acts up once in a while, mainly when I change climates. I guess we're all getting older, come to tea. Holy shit, Henry almost shouted. You went through customs with those? His eyes were wide. And had them in the car with us? He added unnecessarily. What? Raymond asked as his eyes went back and forth between Henry and the flat cardboard box in his hand. These? They're just over-the-counter antihistamines, made by an international drug company, just like aspirin. Henry shook his head. Not here, they're not. That's clenbuterol, and it's a controlled substance in this country. Might as well be cocaine. If the customs guy had noticed it, you'd be in a cell right now. If that highway patrol guy that stopped us had found it, my car and all your guns would be gone forever. They would have been used in the transportation of a controlled substance and taken under the seizure laws. Henry took the package from his friend's hand, pulled the plastic heat-sealed packet from inside it, and handed the pills back. Then he began to methodically tear the pasteboard box into tiny pieces and drop them into the garbage disposal. Grab a plate and I'll tell you about it while we eat. He picked up his glass of juice and went on. Whole story, a few years ago, this guy named Bill Phillips out in Colorado had a newsletter he put out for athletes. He gave them straight, unbiased information on nutrition, natural supplements, and drugs as they related to strength training using empirical evidence instead of opinion. Had a lot of info on various anabolics. Then the DBA reclassified anabolic steroids and put them in same category as cocaine, LSD, hashish, and all that. All of a sudden, to get anabolics, instead of having your doctor or vet write a script for you and going to a drugstore and buying something made by a drug company like Merck or Ciba-Geigy, you had to deal with the same people that smuggle crack. And you were probably getting God knows what, brewed up in a filthy garage in Mexico and stuck in a used bottle with a counterfeit label. Anabolics are much harder to make than amphetamines, so 99% of the stuff coming in had no steroids in it at all, just bathtub speed, which is a hell of a lot harder on your system. The only guys getting the real stuff made by real drug companies were the people that had enough dough to be wired into the feds, like pro football players, pro wrestlers, and pro bodybuilders. So this newsletter writer began to dig into obscure medical papers trying to find any info on over-the-counter stuff like caffeine or aspirin or whatever that documented side effects that would be of interest to athletes. And guess what? He found this clinical test on a European over-the-counter asthmatic called clenbuterol, Clembumar, in South America. The report noted that patients who took the drug, in addition to having their bronchial passages dilated, also experienced increased fat loss and a slight gain in lean muscle mass. Not much of a gain, but a detectable one. Athletes started to use the stuff since it was made by a real drug company and it didn't screw up your system like caffeine or other stimulants, so DEA reclassified it. Now it'll get you sent to prison in this country. Unbelievable. Was probably a good thing you had that hat on to take the customs guy's attention away from your shaving kit. Henry turned to Alan Kane. Ray had a little run-in with customs over his leopard skin hat band. Then they tried to steal his Holland, his G-model fall, and his 2-inch Chief Special because he didn't have proof he bought them here before he left the States. Had to call in a favor with a supervisor I know in New York. Told him to let the agent keep the hat and the .38, but Mike yanked his chain, I guess, and Ray got through with everything. Alan Kane nodded, then scowled. What was wrong with the chief? Oh, that's right, short barrels can't be imported after 68, lest you bring them in with long barrels and swap the parts after they're here. Let me take a look at that G model after we're done eating, Alan said to the new guest. See if you got a real early one. As the three men devoured the biscuits, Canadian bacon, fresh cantaloupe, scrambled eggs, and orange juice, Alan Kane asked Ray about hunting in Africa. From Kane's questions and comments, it became apparent to Ray Johnson that although Alan Kane had never hunted big game, he was even more expert than Henry Bowman on firearms design. Like Henry, he lived on a property where he could shoot whenever he wanted to, and he fired large quantities of ammunition almost daily. As you know, Ray, I'm licensed to deal in machine guns, Henry explained to the professional hunter. Alan here has a license above that. He's a destructive device manufacturer and double D ammo manufacturer. I do a decent business selling squirt guns to police departments and rich collectors, but it's still only part-time. Alan really does it as a business, and he knows more than anybody in the country about making machine guns and cannons work right. He reworks stuff for the Secret Service, does swaps with the Enfield Pattern Room in England, you name it. Last year, he did a big demo where he showed one of the SEAL teams how a bunch of foreign belt feds worked, ones they hadn't been able to get to fire more than 2 shots straight. They thought it was a miracle. Kane laughed and shook his head. Fat lot of good it's done me. I can't even get this goddamned Israeli. My detonate ammo cleared. I wish someone on the SEAL team could call Imports Branch and tell them we're all on the same side. Maybe hurry them up a little. It's been 6 months, for Christ's sake. What's the problem? Ray asked. It's AP, Kane said in a tone that showed he thought his 2-word answer was sufficient explanation. And? Ray said, raising his eyebrows. Alan, Henry broke in, Ray's been out of the country for 30 years. There have been a lot of changes since '63 that don't make sense to him. 30 years? Shit, you must think you're on a different planet, Kane exclaimed. Okay, APMO, better give you the whole story. Alan Kane took a final bite of biscuit, wiped his mouth, and leaned back in his chair. Ever since '34, and especially since a little after you left, there's been a push to ban guns, put more restrictions on them, all that crap, on a federal level. A lot of shit has gone through, but of course not as much as the big government folks wanted. Then, back in the early '80s, a couple of politicians who'd had some of their proposals shot down decided to take a different tack and focus instead on the ammunition. But they needed a hook, like Saturday night specials in the 1970s and assault rifles in the late 1980s. The fuckers knew they needed some evil-sounding term to describe a type of inanimate object that would fail their strawman test of sporting purpose. The phrase these jerks settled on was cop-killer bullets. Once they got that label into common use, they were home free. Who could oppose a ban on bullets that were specifically designed to kill police officers? Only dangerous lunatics, right? Kane leaned back and took a drink of his Coke. Once they had set the terms, Henry broke in, the prohibitionists then set about to define which bullets were cop killers and which were not. The beauty of this strategy was that once the legislation was passed and it was the definition of the types of bullets that were banned could be broadened by BATF decree, bypassing the annoying legislative process. It was like putting atheists in charge of deciding which religions are acceptable to practice. Of course, Kane threw out, the way the news played it up, everyone who watched television got the idea that criminals were regularly killing vest-wearing cops by shooting them with exotic ammunition specifically designed to shoot through police body armor. Kane laughed. Fact was, at the time the stupid cop-killer bullet ban was passed, there had never been one documented case of a police officer wearing body armor being shot through his vest, let alone killed. Henry nodded vigorously in agreement, then broke in again. Any 13-year-old in science class could tell you that basic physics made the entire argument ludicrous for 2 reasons. First, and as you well know, Henry said, looking at Ray, in a given caliber at a given velocity, you can trade expansion for penetration, but you can't increase both. Say, for example, a standard Magnum round will cut maybe 12 layers of Kevlar. It depends on the particular weave, but say it'll go through 12. And 15 layers will stop it. An enthusiastic 12-year-old with an ice pick can zip right through 30 layers of the same material. No sweat. Henry raised his eyebrows and continued. So now you, Mr. Exotic Ammunition Manufacturer, decide you're going to load some armor-piercing. 44 mag ammo, what do? You give the 44 bullet more penetration by making it more like the ice pick, sharp and pointed instead of blunt, and made of a hard, non-deforming material like steel, titanium, or tungsten, instead of soft and malleable copper and lead. You decide to go whole hog and make centerless ground. Sharpen tungsten bullets, then coat them with Teflon so they won't ruin the barrel. Using your $5 round super-duper ammo, the 44 will penetrate a 15-layer vest, but not an 18-layer one. Big change, right? And on top of the huge cost, your new, pointy, non-deforming bullet is much less deadly when it hits flesh, because it causes much less trauma than a bullet that's either blunt or designed to expand on impact. And the second reality, Alan Kane broke in, is that any bullet, regardless of its construction, will go through all known soft body armor if it's going fast enough. Henry's got some, 38 special ammo he loaded with plastic bullets and a bunch of Winchester 230. They're so light they won't even go the length of a football field, fired like this, Kane said, demonstrating by pointing his right index finger at a 40-degree angle. Yeah, and at 5 feet. Fired out of your little 2-inch barreled Chief Special, Henry broke in. They'll chop a dime-sized hole in a vest rated to stop a 44 Magnum. Velocity's the key. Doesn't matter what you make the bullet out of. Which is why every modern rifle round will shoot through both sides of a typical vest, regardless of what the bullet's made of. Hell, the 243, 270, 7mm Magnum, 338, 375, and 458 loaded with goddamn soft points will cut half-inch steel plate, for Christ's sake. Half-inch steel's a lot more bullet-resistant than any soft body armor I ever saw. So, what are cop-killer bullets? Ray asked. For legal purposes, I mean. Legislators decided that for legal purposes, AP ammo would be defined as any handgun ammunition loaded with bullets that were primarily composed of any metal harder than lead or copper, Henry answered. Sale of this ammo was then restricted to law enforcement entities like the ATF agents who shot each other down in Waco, Texas. They were using MP5s loaded with some steel cyclone rounds made up for a government contract, which they shot each other with, while diligently trying to execute 90 members of a religious group, Kane threw in. Over a suspected $200 tax liability, Henry added. I read about that, Ray said, nodding. Wait till you see the footage the news crews shot before the feds made a move back a mile, Henry said meaningfully. Anyway, back to the AP bullet thing. Way the law's written, federally licensed dealers, even those like me who are authorized to deal in machine guns, are looking at a $250,000 fine and 10 years in prison if we sell one round of pistol ammo loaded with a steel bullet. That's ridiculous. Yeah, but it gets worse, Alan Kane said. One byproduct of the whole mess was the news people gave a postgraduate education to all the violent criminals in this country. Most of them didn't know so many cops wore vests, because most of the vests out there are made by New Lease up in Michigan, and they make the most comfortable vests that don't show when you wear them under your clothes. Yeah, that's Dave Richards' company. He's always told everybody if they see the armor, they shoot for the head. Which is exactly what all the bad guys started doing, Alan Kane interjected. Press told him all the cops were wearing vests, which was actually a crock since lots of cops leave them in the trunk even if they've got them, but the bad guys believed it and started shooting them in the head. What does this have to do with your 308 ammo? Ray asked immediately. This is where it goes from stupid to insane, Henry said, and lots of people, me included, think this was the main plan all along. ATF started adding rifle ammunition to the ban list. Every time the ATF discovered a single example of a handgun made to fire a rifle caliber, all steel-cored ammunition in that caliber became verboten. Some guy built a single-shot handgun on an XP-100 action for long-range shooting in. 308 Winchester, and when the ATF found this out in 1983, all importation of steel-cored military. 308 ammo was halted, and selling a single round of it suddenly became a felony. Same thing happened to 7.62 Pi 39 rifle ammo 10 years later, Alan Kane added. In 1993, despite everybody begging them to scrap the idea, the dumb cocksuckers at Olympic Arms in Washington State built several prototypes of a 5-pound repeating handgun based on one of their AR-15 type receivers. So ATF immediately put that caliber on the ban list for any ammo that had steel cores, which was 90% of the stuff coming in the country. And the only reason the steel-cored ammunition was made that way was because steel's cheaper than brass or lead, Henry explained, which was why the stuff was loaded in steel cases, too. There's some lead core stuff out there, Kane went on, and it's much deadlier. Goes through vests like cardboard, just like any high-velocity rifle round, and fragments inside the wearer. ATF didn't give a fuck about that. They were the experts. They said one pistol made it a pistol caliber, so it was banned. The only exemption to the cop-killer bullet ban, like the immunity from most laws, is for government and law enforcement transactions, Henry Bowman explained to Ray, who was still looking baffled. And this exemption applies in some circumstances to situations where the ammunition is not actually sold to the government or law enforcement agency. And that's where Alan's deal comes in. He's got this deal going that came about because of design work he's been doing on the U.S. M60 machine gun. Bottom line, the Indiana man said, the M60 sucks. It's the worst machine gun ever adopted in the last 50 years by a major army. United States Army adopted it in 1960 to replace the recoil, operated, 3006 Browning 1917 and 1919 models, and whoever signed off on that decision ought to have his balls cut off and fed to him. What's wrong with it? Raymond asked. Alan Kane took a deep breath. It's as if someone looked at 10 early design machine guns and incorporated all the worst features into a new design. They took the unsupported bolt and piston post design from a Lewis gun, only instead of using good quality heat-treated steel like on a Lewis, they made it out of soft, schlocky shit that falls apart right away. They claim the M60 is based on the German MG42, but what they really mean is it's made out of stampings. That's fine, but the designers left out the MG42 sear trip. Instead of making it so the bolt slaps the sear trip when you release the trigger and slams the sear into the engaged position, the sear on the 60 is connected directly to the trigger. As you let go of the trigger, the sear tries to gradually engage. The bolt is flying back and forth all the while, hammering the engagement edge. So the sear gets worn immediately, and pretty soon the gun starts running away on you. To close the top cover, the bolt has to be cocked. If you try to close it when the bolt isn't, you bend stuff. The front sight's fixed and the rear sight's adjustable, which is the exact opposite of what you want on a gun with a quick change barrel. Put on a new barrel and your gun no longer shoots where it used to. By the same token, they put the bipod on the barrel instead of the receiver, so you have to carry a spare bipod with every spare barrel, which is stupid. There's not enough locking lug area on an M60, so after 50 rounds the gun has 10 thousandths excess headspace, which makes it batter itself harder as it fires and causes frequent case head separations that tie up the gun. To compound that problem, the chamber's cut so that the case head protrudes 150 thousandths, instead of the more common 125 thousandths of other NATO caliber machine guns. That means you have to shoot ammo with extra thick case heads. If you shoot stuff designed for the normal NATO chamber, like all the US ammo loaded for the GE minigun, the case head blows right in front of the web. That blows the extractor into the barrel extension, and you need a workbench, a vise, and a power grinder just to get the gun apart and the broken pieces out of it. If the gun has the right ammo and does keep shooting, then the gas regulator will vibrate off. That's why the factory tells you to safety wire the regulator, but that means you have to cut the safety wire off every time you want to clean the gun. The regulator itself is what they call self-adjusting, which really means it does not adjust at all. If it works okay when the gun's dirty, then it flows too much gas when it's clean, and the gun beats itself to death. If it flows the right amount when the gun's clean, then there's not enough gas volume when the gun gets dirty, so it quits firing. The extractor and ejector springs are weak, so cases drop into the receiver instead of being kicked out. The receiver's tiny, with a side ejection port, so you can't get your fingers in to clear it. John Browning's belt feds all have big receivers, and they eject out the bottom, so gravity keeps them clean. On other belt feds, the cartridge is brought halfway into position in the feed block when the bolt goes back and extracts the round from the belt, and the cartridge is moved the rest of the way as the bolt goes forward to chamber it. On the M60, though, the entire positioning is done on the rearward bolt stroke, and the belt remains stationary as the bolt goes forward. That's why the M60 belt jerks so much as it goes through the gun, unlike other guns that spread out the movement. I always point out that a good indication of the quality of any weapons design is the number of different countries that have made it their standard issue weapon. Practically the only countries other than the United States that ever adopted the M60 were ones like Vietnam and the Philippines, where we gave the goddamn things to them. The Australians bought some without us breathing down their necks, probably when they were drunk, but now they've wised up and the 60s are history. On the other hand, about 30 countries have outfitted their soldiers with Belgian Mag 58 machine guns and paid for the weapons with their own money. The Mag 58 is basically the receiver of the 1918 bar turned upside down and adapted to use linked belts instead of detachable box magazines. Henry likes bars, Kane added. And Alan likes mags, Henry threw in. Damn right. Field trials showed that the mag would outlast the M60 by a factor of about 40 to 1, and about 4 years ago the United States Marine Corps said fuck the M60s and replaced them with Mag 58 seconds. He paused and drank some orange juice. Anyway, Kane continued, Saco Defense is one of the primary contractors now supplying the Army's M60s, and they want to keep the business. They also want their guns to function better and last longer before breaking. One of the executives at Saco was at Knob Creek in '93. That's a big machine gun shoot in Kentucky. He was at the shoot in 1993, and he saw all the junk M60s that guys had pieced together and registered before the 1986 ban. Kane stopped and looked at Henry. Does Ray know about how they fucked us in '86? No, but I'll tell him later. Go ahead. Okay, anyway, all of these guns had been functioning even more unreliably than factory-produced M60s, except the two I was shooting. So this guy comes up to me, and he starts asking me how I got them to working so well, and I told him No, Henry broke in immediately. That's not how it happened. He turned to Ray and grinned broadly. What really happened was, there's a ceasefire so they can go put out more junk to shoot at, and this guy comes over to where we're shooting, and he says something to Alan like, these other people with their re-welded M60 are having all kinds of jams. Your guns must be original, or something like that. So then Alan here, being such a diplomatic devil, what does he do? He immediately says, shit, no, mine's not original. The originals are even worse than those other re-welds you see on the line. The design itself is bad enough, but the dumb bastards who built the thing didn't even bother to machine the parts right. I played with the cam angles and changed the timing. Mine'll go 2-3 times as long as a factory new one before it breaks. If I could try a little different heat treat on a couple parts, I think I could double that again. It's still junk next to a mag, but the dumb bootlips at Saco Defense can't even put the sears in right side up. Kane was laughing at Henry's imitation of him. That's right, I did say that to him, didn't I? He admitted. Well, hell, I didn't know who he was, Alan Kane added defensively. And that's when the guy tells Alan that he works at Saco, and he's in charge of quality control or some damn thing, and would Alan fly up there and show them what to do, Henry added. So I go up there, Kane explained, and I look around and I tell them I need 1 million rounds of ammo and 10 of their guns, and I'll figure out how they can make them better given the constraints of their tooling. They just about shit when I told them that much ammo for 10 guns, and I'm thinking, Jesus, don't you guys shoot any of this stuff before you ship it out and expect some kid to bet his life on it? That's when they tell me that all ammunition at Saco Defense is technically the property of the U.S. government and can't be released to a private citizen. Keep in mind that Alan is offering to do this work for free, Henry threw out, and at the same time the government is burning billion-round stockpiles of 308 ammo to destroy it. Yeah, and I even offered to return all the fired brass to prove that I hadn't taken the ammo and sold it. They still said no. So what did you do? Ray asked. He found the entire conversation appalling. That brings us to the current situation. Saco finally agreed to pay for the test ammo out of company research funds, but I had to get it cheap, so I found some out-of-date Israeli, 308 AP for a nickel delivered. It would go for more than that in this country, except they won't approve it for importation because it's a so-called armor-piercing pistol round, as we were explaining. I've applied for an import permit based on the fact that it will be used for government testing, but it hasn't been approved yet, and I'm not holding my breath. Ray's eyes narrowed in fury at the whole bizarre situation. I don't know what the hell I was expecting to come home to, he thought angrily, but it sure as shit wasn't this.